The US military went from having around 111 religious codes for people to use to register for various things, even like to have listed on their dog tags, and dropped to 31 after the whole debacle of the Mormon Church, or rather the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, making a stink that they were dropped and they were re-added. But overall, that's 180 codes dropped and a large diversity of people no longer being able to pick anything other than the large buckets of other and no religion. But despite all of that, my former denomination, the Assemblies of God, still gets its own separate code, a single Christian denomination. And as we get into this, you'll see it's not the only denomination, but let's talk about it. Hi, I am former Fundy. Welcome to my channel if you are new. If you are a return viewer, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And if you aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. So I wanted to take a look at this list with you. Instead of very specifically focusing on everything that was dropped, while I will touch a little bit on that, I want to look more at the list and the thought process behind this list and how inconsistent it is in that thought process, at least in my opinion. It's very clear if you look at it, it is very Christian-centric, as the majority of the codes are Christian with an additional specification of what type of Christian. But one of the very first issues I see is a big contradiction, and it's right at the start. So the first code listed, because it's in alphabetical order, is agnostic, and agnostic is not a religion. And while I do see the merits of leaving it as an option on this list, it technically falls under no religion, which is also an option. So if you're agnostic, you could technically select agnostic and no religion and be correct. There's another non-religion that is very clearly missing from this list, and that is atheist. Atheist was on the list before, but now if you are an atheist, you have to select no religion. Now, as I said before, the majority of this list are Christian denominations. And then beyond that, you have just the major religions listed and no subcategories within them. Only 9 of the 31 codes are not some type of Christianity. And I find that extremely telling what the purpose and focus of this whittling down was. Now, I am not arguing against having these different codes for different Christian denominations within the military, but setting aside everything that was just straight out dropped, with which there are a lot of problems with that, and I'm sure other creators who are more informed on some of those other religions have spoken about it, and you can probably find a lot of insight from them. But I don't know a ton about a lot of the things that were dropped, if I'm being honest. One thing I will say that I know is I used to have a pretty good friend who was in the military. We stopped talking. It was a bit awkward near the end of our friendship because I think he was hoping that something would happen between us. And when I revealed years ago now that I was engaged, he cried, but we never spoke after that. But when we were friends, he shared a lot of things just about his military experience and what that was like. And one of the things he shared with me that I found interesting and was something that would have used to be included in the codes, because I know there were definitely chaplains for it, is that there were a lot of people in the military who followed and believed very like traditional Norse type beliefs. And I know people who identify with that, they tend to list things like pagan or heathen as their religion. I think there's another one, Astaru, related to those Norse gods and goddesses. Forgive me if I completely butchered that. Like I said, I'm not very familiar on just pagan religions in general. But I do know from my friend there was a significant amount of them for him to even mention it and talk to me about it and how common it was. And he was talking to me about why he felt it was so common. Because when you're in an area, which he was for years at a time, where people are dying quite frequently, and he felt that there would be a comfort in a place like Valhalla, a afterlife for warriors who died honorably in combat. But like I said, instead of focusing too much on a lot of the various things that were dropped, I want to just address the very weird logic on what was and what wasn't included. Because the thing that made me start thinking about this is that Assemblies of God, my former denomination, gets to have its own code, while there are so many other things that don't. And so when I'm looking at the list of all of these different options and flavors of Christian, some of them are straight up denominations. In fact, a lot of them are, while others are just categories of Christian that some of the other ones would fit into. So for example, the Assemblies of God is Pentecostal. It's also evangelical. And on this list, we have Christian evangelical and we have Christian Pentecostal. And so like if you're part of the Foursquare denomination, which is very similar to the Assemblies of God in its beliefs, it is also Pentecostal and evangelical. So if you're in that boat, which one do you pick? I don't know. I guess you just guess. I guess you just pick whichever one resonates with you more. And I'm not saying that we need options for every single Christian denomination. If they really wanted to whittle this list down, they could have cut down on the amount of Christian denominations listed instead of the rest of the diversity. Catholic gets its own, which that one I will say I think makes sense, because there are plenty of Protestant denominations that will say or believe that Catholics aren't truly Christian for various reasons. If you ever want me to make a video about that, just let me know and I will. I do notice that Protestant isn't on here as a bucket option, but I guess they didn't need to because they listed just a bunch of Protestant denominations. If we're looking at the bizarre logic for deciding what Christian options there are, and like I said, we have a bunch of Christian just denominations who get their own code, and then a few Christian bucket options, you would think that perhaps some of these other religions, you would want to list multiple sects or multiple denominations from them, because some of them can be quite diverse. As for the Baha'i faith, I'm not really sure. Is anyone Baha'i other than Rainn Wilson? I don't like to use Google anymore because there's just a bunch of AI trash at the beginning, so I'm going to use you guys as Google. If you know anyone else who is of the Baha'i faith, tell me in the comments. Even better, if you are someone who believes in the Baha'i faith, let me know how you got involved in believing that, what about it was compelling, and how you decide when one prophet's time is over and the next prophet's time has begun. Is it based on like the prophet's death or something else? And how much time goes between one prophet dying and another one coming into prominence and being the like leader of the faith? I'll be honest, I don't know very much about Baha'i, other than I think they say that like, oh, Jesus was the prophet for his time, Muhammad was the prophet for his time, and now there's like a different prophet for our time. But moving on, so they have Buddhism as just a bucket term. Buddhism has 3 major sects or variations, but other than that, there are 300 distinct sects. And so you would think they would at least want to list the 3 major ones as options. Then for Hinduism, Hinduism is known to have 4 major sects. Once again, would it have killed them to give Hinduism 4 options? Islam is very well known for having 2 major distinct sects, Sunni and Shia. When I looked into it, there are also 3 minor ones that are gaining in prominence. And so again, could they not have done like Shia, Sunni, other for Muslim? Could Muslim not have 3 options? And then Judaism also has a few different like denominations or sects, and there's big differences between some of them. Like an Orthodox Jew leads a very different life than a Reformed Jew. And so again, would it have killed them to inflate the list? I don't know. Maybe, maybe a list of 50 that's more condensed with a lot of trimming down in the Christian section, because really if we're cutting down so strictly on everything else, does Christianity really need 22 of the 31 codes on here? I don't think so. I think it could have been condensed quite a bit. And so it's just quite silly. And to me, when I look at this list, what it looks like to me is that they kept probably the majority of the Christian codes that they had before, and then someone opened up a book that like listed major world religions and was like, okay, we're only going to include these and we're going to cut out anything that's not a major world religion, instead of perhaps what maybe would have been more effective, looking at your current demographics within the military, seeing how many people were registered to each code, and then going from there to see maybe which ones had very small numbers or maybe no one registered at all, and look to those areas to maybe condense. But instead, it really does feel like they kept all of the Christian options, except for when they temporarily excluded Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I do think the exclusion had to do with Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still not having the same name recognition as Mormon. Almost everyone still refers to that group as Mormons, including people within that group, because for the longest time they went by Mormon. And then from what I've heard from Mormon creators, especially Mormon Stories, who is currently in a lawsuit with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because they're trying to suppress him and harm the reach that he has. It seems like the elders of the church decided that too many people felt that Mormons weren't Christians. They rebranded to their formal name instead of the colloquial name Mormon. And they went very strictly to Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and pushed, oh, we don't use Mormon anymore, in an attempt to seem that, no, we're not different, we are Christians. But it mostly just backfired, because I think the average person, if they know one of them, they know Mormon, not Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is such a mouthful. It's really such a mouthful, and just wouldn't, fit on branding as well. It's a bad marketing choice overall, but I think that's why it got excluded, because whoever was doing the list was like, I don't recognize this, and so I'm just going to cut it out because I don't know what it is. But if it had said Mormon, it probably would have stayed. in the initial cutting. When I look at this list, the other thing I notice is just how prevalent of the options are churches that are either evangelical, Pentecostal, or both, because the Christian nationalist movement has been a very evangelical one and has been seen quite a bit in some of the Pentecostal denominations. And so while I was initially surprised that my former denomination got its own code, even in this new condensed list, upon further reflection, I don't find it surprising at all, because it's churches like the Assemblies of God and other evangelical churches that are just really blindly supportive and devoted to Trump. I am not saying all Assemblies of God churches. I know of at least 2 Assemblies of God pastors who definitely do not fall in that category. One was very, very uncomfortable with Trump during Trump's first term, and I'm assuming that he is still uncomfortable now about it. The other one is my best friend's husband, who is very, very not supportive of Trump. And they have done really great things like make plans and decide what they would do if ICE came and tried to arrest people in their church. So I know there are good people. I know there are very good people within the Assemblies of God. So I'm certainly not saying everyone. But it does seem to be a lot of evangelical churches and denominations that have been very supportive of Trump. And then there's also this weird wave of new Catholics, of people who weren't Catholic before, but are in this Christian nationalist movement, who are newly becoming Catholics, which I find very interesting. It seems too that not just for Catholicism, but other religions as well, people who are born into the religion tend to be more chill. This obviously doesn't include me, because I was not very chill. I was quite fanatical, and obviously there can be fanatical people born into religions. But I'm talking as a broader whole. It seems that people who were raised within religions, and I see this with like Catholicism, a lot of people who were born Catholic are very chill about things. It's the ones who convert as adults who are weirdly militant and pushy in a way that just doesn't represent the rest of the group. But it's really interesting. So that's my 2 cents on this new condensed list. I do think it's a travesty, all of the things that were just dropped, and it definitely feels like a breach of freedom of religion, because the way this list is just significantly more representative of Christian denominations as opposed to anything else, it definitely looks like the government is endorsing Christianity over other religions, whether explicitly or implicitly, and I feel like it's intentional. And groups like the Military Religious Freedom Foundation are speaking out about this and how it feels like a constitutional violation, because I think it is a constitutional violation. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day and an awesome week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never zoom on the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. I'm in the Lord's army, yes sir. I'm in the Lord's army, yes sir.
I cannot do mental math. I was really good at like higher level math, but I've never been able to do this kind of stuff in my head.